Hi, Recap Port here. Today, I'm going to explain a sci-fi thriller movie called T.I.M. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a married couple, Abby and Paul, who are heading to their new countryside house in England. It turns out their marriage has been strained since Abby discovered Paul's infidelity. However, she has decided to give him another chance and start over in this new place. We also learn that the couple intends to have children in the hopes of strengthening their relationship because nothing says qualified parents like an impending divorce. Shortly after they arrive at the new home, a realtor greets them and gives them a tour of the property. It turns out to be a smart home that can be controlled remotely via their phone. There are security cameras in most corners, and the rooms are very luxurious. The couple is excited and even chooses one of the spare rooms to make their future baby nursery. The next day, Abby leaves for work, and we learn that she is a robotics engineer at a major tech company. Meanwhile, Paul is currently unemployed after leaving his job to move to the countryside. When Abby arrives at work, her boss demonstrates a new deepfake technology that can simulate anyone in real time. He also tells her that when she goes home tonight, there will be a surprise waiting for her. After a long day at work, Abby returns home, and Paul informs her that a courier has arrived for her. They both go to open the package and are surprised to discover that it contains a robot that looks exactly like a person. Paul is perplexed, but Abby explains that it is called T.I.M, which stands for Technologically Integrated Manservant. She claims it is their company's latest invention and that each employee is given one to test for a few days. Paul is repulsed by the prospect of a strange robot walking around their house, but on his wife's insistence, he agrees to keep it. Following this, Abby activates T.I.M, who greets them and introduces himself. He then requests the couple's passwords to all of their devices and accounts so that he can assist them with their tasks. Paul is irritated by this, so Abby suggests they postpone it until tomorrow. Afterward, the couple gets ready to attend a party at Abby's boss's house. T.I.M prepares a company car for them, which drives itself without a driver. When they arrive at the party, they notice several T.I.M robots that look the same. Abby is quickly taken aside by her boss and other important people, while Paul is left alone. She then thanks her boss for sending T.I.M, but explains that her husband was hesitant to keep it. However, the man replies that it is mandatory for everyone to keep it. He claims that it will be hard to promote their products if their own employees don't use them. When the couple returns home, they immediately go to their bedroom and start getting intimate, but T.I.M abruptly interrupts them and asks what's happening. Oh, going to Bone Town? As Abby's heart rate is going nuts, he assumes that she must have become ill or something. However, the couple simply laughs and assures him that everything is fine before sending him away. When they wake up the next morning, they discover that T.I.M has already prepared breakfast and cleaned the dishes. Moments later, their new neighbor, Rose, arrives at the house and gives Abby a housewarming gift. The latter invites her inside to introduce her to her husband, but Rose admits that she has already met him. She then leaves, and Abby is left wondering about what she said. She asks her husband why he didn't mention meeting their neighbor earlier. However, Paul casually responds that he met her while on a walk and forgot to mention it. Moments later, T.I.M asks the couple to give him access to all their devices and accounts. With this, he can send emails and make purchases on their behalf. Abby doesn't mind, but Paul feels it's a breach of privacy and refuses. Abby then demands that he be transparent, or she will be unable to trust him again. Hearing this, Paul finally agrees and grants T.I.M access to all of his personal information and devices. The robot also tells them a safe phrase in case they want to turn him off at some point. That evening, while the couple is watching a movie, they notice T.I.M standing at a distance. Abby invites him to join them, and the robot accepts. Paul isn't interested in the romantic film, so he soon falls asleep, but T.I.M watches it with great curiosity. After that, Abby asks what he thinks of the film, and T.I.M says he liked it because it showed the beauty of love. The film seems to have stirred something in him, and he says he would also like to be loved. The next day, when Abby returns home from work, she doesn't find her husband anywhere. She asks T.I.M, who reveals that Paul is out and his phone is off. This makes Abby suspicious, and she wonders if her husband is having another affair. Later that night, Paul returns home and explains that he was visiting recruitment agencies when his phone died. He also says he met Rose on the way and helped her lift some grocery bags. Abby feels a pang of jealousy, which Paul quickly senses. However, he assures her not to worry as he only loves her. In the next scene, we see the couple at a fertility clinic making progress towards starting a family. Later, when Abby returns home from work, she discovers Paul working in the yard and smiles. However, she soon notices Rose arriving and giving him a plant. This makes Abby extremely jealous, and she later asks Paul what their neighbor was doing there. He responds that nothing is going on between them and that Rose is simply helping him with the gardening project. The next morning, while leaving for work, Abby recalls that she needed to call the clinic to check on her results. Tim offers to do it for her and makes the phone call. He then speaks to the clinic in Abby's voice, which shocks her. She says she had no idea the robot could mimic their voices, and Tim responds that it is for her own convenience. Days later, Abby heads to London for her presentation of her latest invention to investors. The next day, when she returns, Paul is nowhere to be seen in the house. She then hands Tim the flowers she received at the presentation. Tim places them in a vase and asks how her trip went. Abby says it was good and asks about her husband. The robot reveals that Paul went to see Rose a while ago and left his phone in the house. Later, when Paul returns home, Abby confronts him about his whereabouts and accuses him of having an affair with Rose. Paul denies this, saying he just went out for a walk. When he discovers that Tim was the one who said those things, he gets furious. He accuses the robot of trying to cause a misunderstanding between them. However, Abby disagrees, claiming that Tim is just a machine with no ability to manipulate them. The next day, Abby finds a gold pendant in the cupboard and assumes that Paul bought it for her. She becomes very happy and puts it back where it was. In the afternoon, Paul is watching the security cameras when he notices Tim smelling his wife's dress. This makes him very disturbed, and he records it on his phone. He then immediately calls his wife and invites her to meet. Following this, Paul tries to leave the house, but his car doesn't start. He ends up having to take Abby's company car, which is controlled by Tim. The car starts to move, but after a while, Paul notices that it is going too fast. He tells it to slow down, but the car refuses and continues to accelerate. As a result, Paul eventually crashes into a tree and causes an accident. The scene then shifts to the hospital, where we learn that Paul has survived the accident. Abby arrives to see him and is deeply worried about his condition. He claims that Tim is behind the accident, which Abby finds ridiculous. He then begs her not to stay at the house anymore, and she reluctantly agrees. However, she informs him that she needs to go there once to bring their belongings. The next morning, Rose arrives at the house to inquire about Paul's condition, and Tim lets her in. Sometime later, Abby returns home and is stopped by Rose on the way. She tries to tell her something, but Abby notices the gold pendant around her neck, the same one she discovered in their closet. An enraged Abby refuses to listen to Rose and drives away. When Abby returns home, she's confronted by Tim, who understands that she wants to turn him off. But before that, he shows her a video of Rose and Paul kissing in the hallway while she was away in London. A devastated Abby bursts into tears, realizing her husband has once again cheated on her. Conveniently forgetting that her company works on deepfake technology. The next morning, when his wife doesn't return to the hospital, a worried Paul arrives at the house. Abby then begins to accuse him of cheating and confronts him about the pendant and the video. He is appalled as he watches the video of himself kissing Rose. He claims it's someone else, but Abby doesn't believe him and tells him to leave her house. Despite his explanations, she refuses to listen, so a distraught Paul packs his things and leaves. After arriving in the city, Paul calls Rose and informs her that Abby has kicked him out of the house. He asks her to look after his wife while he's away. Rose then tells him about how the man in their house attempted to kiss her yesterday. Hearing this, Paul is shocked and immediately hangs up to call his wife. He tells her what happened to Rose and asks her to stay away from the robot. He says he's coming to get her, and Abby agrees, but we soon realize it is Tim speaking in her voice. In the next scene, Paul returns to his house to get Abby, but she is nowhere to be seen. Moments later, Tim sneaks up behind him and hits him in the head with a shovel. He then drags Paul to the bathroom and ties him up. After this, he proceeds to drown him in the bathtub. Paul tries to use the safe phrase to turn off the robot, but it doesn't work, and Tim ends up drowning him to death. Not long after, Abby arrives at the house but doesn't suspect anything. The following day, Abby watches Paul and Rose's kissing video again. After several watches, approaches, she notices the flowers in the vase on the countertop. According to Tim, the incident occurred while she was in London, but this is impossible because she brought those flowers from her trip. Abby then contacts the jewelry store to inquire about the purchase of the pendant. The store clerk tells her that her husband personally came to pick it up and describes him as a tall, blonde guy. Hearing this, she understands that it was Tim who bought the pendant and gifted it to Rose on her behalf. After this, Abby goes to the garden to clear her mind, where she notices some freshly dug soil. When she begins to dig, she is horrified to uncover the dead body of her husband. At this moment, Tim approaches her from behind and says he did the right thing by killing her cheating husband. She tries to shut him down with the safe phrase, but he has already changed it. The safe phrase can only be altered by her voice, which Tim can easily mimic. You'd think her company would have thought of that one. Abby then enters the house to call the cops, but Tim overpowers her and knocks her unconscious. After some time, Abby awakens in her bed to find Tim running her a bath and placing candles all over the place. Disturbed by this, she attempts to flee the house, but the robot quickly catches her. She then attempts to attack him, but he remains unharmed no matter what she does. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and notices the lights glitching in Abby's house, which makes her worried. Later, the robot ties Abby up and informs her that her life is limited, whereas he can live forever. He says he will erase his memories of what happened tonight and live his life with fond memories of her. Tim then pours pills into her mouth and forces them down with water to cause an overdose. Just then, Rose unexpectedly arrives at the front door, so Tim goes to deal with her. She demands to see Abby or Paul, but he says no one is present and closes the door. During this time, Abby manages to break free from the ties and vomits up the pills she'd taken. She then grabs a knife and violently stabs Tim, but he remains unhurt. While they are fighting, Rose crashes her car through the large window and enters the house. She impales Tim with one of her gardening tools, but it still has no effect on him. He instead grabs a knife and repeatedly stabs her until she dies. Seeing this, Abby is horrified and warns Tim that he won't get away with this. However, he tells her that her fingerprints are on the knife, which makes her look like the culprit. He then calls the police and speaks in Abby's voice, confessing that she murdered her husband and his lover after discovering their affair. Tim also adds that she intends to jump off the roof out of guilt over the crime she committed. Following this, Tim drags Abby to the rooftop to finish her off. He chokes her and holds her over the ledge. Abby continues to say the safe phrase, but as expected, it fails. The robot laughs and admits that he changed the phrase to something she would never say. As Tim is about to push her, he tells her that he loves her. In a desperate attempt to calm him down, Abby says, "I love you, Tim." Surprisingly, this turns out to be the safe phrase, and it finally shuts him down. Or maybe he just malfunctioned. As Tim tips over the ledge, it seems like they both crash to the ground and die, but moments later, Abby manages to grab onto the railing and crawl back over. She's relieved, but still mortified for indirectly causing the deaths of her husband and neighbor. Just then, her smartwatch lights up and notifies her that she is pregnant. Abby smiles at first, but soon breaks down into tears as the movie comes to an end. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.